All right, I don't know what time it is on your clock, but I know what I'm getting ready for. It is time for the Professional CISO podcast with David Malicoat.
Welcome, one and all, to the Professional CISO Show. I'm your host, David Malicoat. This show is an exploration of the topics necessary to transform the role of the CISO into one of a professional. All right, gang, today, a little bit different. Love it, though, because I've been looking forward to this one for a long time. We have an interview with a leader in the strategic communications advisory field. A lot of things that we talk about from a CISO perspective or from a cybersecurity perspective that has to do with communications, particularly around breach and or board and or public regulatory. This is the guy we want to have on. So his roots are in journalism, corporate communications, marketing, and legal strategic communications. Now, a couple notables about our guest today. He is a cyclist, passionately. He tries to complete at least 100 miles per week in cycling. And he was the president of one of the largest cycling clubs in the country, at least until January of this year. But before we begin, I want you to like, follow, share. It's the best way to make sure that we keep coming out with this great content that we have, bringing guests like we have today. Hit that follow button on Apple and Spotify. Subscribe on YouTube. Follow us on LinkedIn, and hey, you're liking what you hear, like what you see, send it out to a colleague, send it out to a friend, share it with somebody. All right, now let's talk about being a professional CISO. In today's episode, our guest is David Chamberlin. He is currently the Managing Director of Strategic Communications Advisory Team at Orrick, Herrington Sutcliffe LLP. He's held positions at Urbana Daily Citizen, Nortel, JP Morgan Chase, Edelman, PNC Bank, and SonicWall, just to name a few. There's more to choose from, but please welcome David Chamberlin.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. It's fun to do this.
Thanks for coming, man. I know we talked about this quite a while ago, a couple times, and then we had a call, did a little bit of strategic planning on this. Glad you could make it in. I know you're busy, number one, and I truly appreciate you making the time.
No problem.
And also, you're sitting here waiting on AC/DC tickets, so we want to be sensitive to that. I'm down with what you're throwing down on that. All right, so while we're waiting on AC/DC to come through, a little bit different, because I always ask my guests, give me that 1 to 2 minutes on how you initially kind of came into contact with technology and cybersecurity. With you, I think it's more of, talk me through your arc around communications, and then how did you get involved with kind of the cybersecurity communications aspect?
Sure. Both my parents were English teachers. So you immediately walked into communications, and my father, from a technology standpoint, you don't know this about me, my father was the president of the Apple Dayton, Ohio user group. And so as a kid, pre-internet, all that stuff, I had access to great technology and a lot of fun stuff with Apple. And so for me, I just naturally gravitated to that. When I got to college, I was going to be a business major. I wanted to have a BMW. And I got into my first accounting class and was like, no friggin' way am I doing this. This is awful. I'd rather, there are a lot of other things I'd rather do. Right. I've always been a good writer and other things. And so I ended up turning to mass communications as a major. I was on staff at the school newspaper for 3 years. I was the editor my senior year. And so it just kind of naturally happened. And so for me, I ended up working at a political think tank, and then from there moved into kind of the PR ranks of Burson Marsteller and some of those types of things. And so really it was at Nortel where, to get to the heart of your question, is we got breached, as everybody knows. The Chinese did a number on Nortel, yes, and so all of our stuff ended up going out the door. And so that's really the first place that I got familiar with cybersecurity and breaches and all those types of things. And so once you do that, and then you go from there to working at the largest issuer of Visa cards in the world, at the time, everything was breach of credit cards. And so I was working on that from a bank side of things, because the banks would get blamed, even though it wasn't their issue. It was TJX, or name the credit card or the retailer that got breached. And so I've really been around it probably since the early 2000s. 1999, 2000 is when all of that stuff with Nortel and the Chinese started. So once you're around it, and then people are like, well, can you handle this from a crisis communications perspective? And because of all the crisis work I'd done at Burson, it was like, well, yeah, I'll try. And you kind of naturally do it at the bank. And then, once you do 2 or 3 reps, everybody's like, oh,
He's the guy.
he's the guy.
Yeah.
And so for me, it just kind of happened naturally, and kind of became more prevalent once a colleague of mine, Joe Carberry, and I wrote a piece for Forbes, back when Forbes was a real publication, in 2009. And then from there, it just took off. Founded Edelman's Data Privacy and Security Group globally in 2012. And while I enjoy it, it's not my favorite thing to do because it starts to, they're really pretty similar. So when I left Edelman, it was like, okay, I'm enough with
And for those
data
of us
cybersecurity.
Those of us in the audience that are not educated on Edelman.
So Edelman's
I
the
know
largest,
it better now because of you and Chris Hirschberger. So
yeah, Edelman's the largest PR firm in the world. Okay. And so for me, I ran the Dallas office. I'd run the Shanghai office in China. And so I transitioned from running the office here in Dallas to running the global practice around data privacy and security. And so, but after a while, there's only so much of that you can do before you're like, oh my gosh, this feels like being on an assembly line.
Right.
I'm kind of doing many of the same
wheel,
things
I'm
over
sure.
and over. And so went off to be the chief communications officer at PNC, but continued to kind of deal with breach issues and crisis and all the other types of things. And really got away from it for about 5 years. And then back in 2020, around COVID time, I was consulting and got a call from one of the law firms I used to work with. Can you help with this? I was like, sure. And most of the law firms knew who I was, the major ones in the space. And so just kind of took off from there, and then finally got to the point where Orrick was like, hey, we'd like to keep this revenue. We think this is a differentiator for us in terms of crisis communications, not just breach. Can you work with us across all of our clients that have reputational issues? And so the way I work with them is, look, it's at the intersection of legal and reputational risk. They deal with all the legal stuff. I know enough to be deadly, but never ask me for legal advice. But on the reputation side, that's not where they really focus.
Right.
They're not looking at all the stakeholder groups. They're not looking at Congress. They're looking at liability. That's their biggest issue that lawyers deal with. And so it's been great because Arvind and I and the team have all been around this. And I think it's surprising to a lot of people that there's somebody like me at a law firm, but I'm kind of like a pig in slop because I love doing all this crisis work. I love playing across the firm. Data breach is fun because it's not 100% of what I do, right. But it's a good share of it. And so, yeah, we have a lot of fun.
And so I think we've known each other for several years now. Mm-hmm. You have fed me information and key points, and it's not like private information, right, or anything like that. I mean, it's something you guys publish anyway, but
thought leadership stuff,
to have it come across and think, wow. And it was timely as well. Full disclosure to the audience as well. You were one of the key players in helping me land Joe Sullivan as an interview a few weeks ago, and I thank you for that. And I know the audience thanks you for that, by the way.
He's a great guy.
He is a great guy, and he made quite the impression. And everybody that I've talked to that's listened to the episode, very meaningful. I've had folks even give feedback that they are now changing how they operate on the daily, or where they operate in the organization on the daily, based upon the part of that interview as well as other stuff that we've covered. So wanted to give you the thanks, while we're live.
I was a small cog in that machine.
But but important one at that.
Glad to help.
So we'll shift a little bit. I always like to ask everybody, I definitely want to hear this out of you because you're not a CISO.
Right.
You're around a lot of different folks. You don't sit in the org. You've been, obviously a critical part of what happens on the communication side. But the idea behind this show is, I think we need to professionalize the role, but that means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. So from an outside looking in, from a communications, seeing all the folks that you've seen, especially in probably their worst times.
Right.
Do we need to professionalize the role of CISO, and what does that mean?
Most definitely. Look, I think CISOs, CIOs, HR people, CMOs, everybody that's not kind of the CEO or CFO is all fighting for a seat at the table. And one of the things that I've talked about for years and years in my profession, and I think it's very applicable to CISOs, is when I'm talking to folks that do my job from a communications problem solving type thing, you can't, if you're just an expert at communications in my case, that's not helpful. Like, yeah, great, you can write a great press release, yeah, you can write a great holding statement or FAQs or whatever. But when I go sit at the table in a crisis, if that's all I'm bringing, I'm going to be at the little kids' table.
Yep.
And I think that all of those functions that I just mentioned in the C-suite all struggle with the same thing. And I think CISOs especially struggle with it. What I see is, and I think Joe probably talked about this on your show, I haven't had a chance to listen to it yet, but I've heard him talk about this a lot. We've got to professionalize the role. We have to have a seat at the table. Mm-hmm. And so for me, I think it's the same for CISOs as all those other positions. You have to be a business expert first, and then a technology expert, or then a marketing expert, or then a communications expert, or an HR expert. Name your discipline. I don't see a lot of that when I'm dealing with most of the CISOs. They're bits and bytes. They're plug and play. They're those types of things. And so a lot of times when you see them in a crisis situation like a cybersecurity incident is, they struggle to communicate. They struggle to show knowledge of the business, how the business works. What are the implications of this breach? They know at a high level, yeah, there are major implications for the company, but if you're a product, if your company makes a product and suddenly you can't produce it because everything's shut down by ransomware, well, all right, well, how does that affect the supply chain? How does that affect all these other things? How does it affect HR and employees? How does it affect all of these various stakeholders? I think at a high level, they have an understanding of that, a theoretical grasp, but I don't know that most of the ones that I've come in contact with are really the business people that go, oh, I know exactly how this impacts these various groups, or hey, I can have a conversation about a P&L
Right.
with the CEO and the CFO.
Well, Joe spoke about that specifically around that owning a P&L.
Yeah.
Right, and that being a goal. So, and maybe for folks that might be, my brain kind of goes to, hey, okay, you're seeing the folks at the critical time. Is this a case of the CISOs, military background, when in a critical situation, you typically, your highest point is where you go to your lowest training, right?
Right.
Or vice versa. Your highest training. Yeah, lowest point, highest training. And so is this a case that you're seeing folks, CISOs do that? Like now it's a critical situation. I kind of revert back to the bits and bytes. Maybe I have some business. You think it's like that? Or is it a case of we're just kind of on the whole?
I think by and large, they're it's kind of, this isn't fair and this is a pretty broad stereotype, but it's almost like they speak Spanish and everybody else is speaking
Oh no,
English.
we've had that analogy on here before. I tell people you drop somebody in Spain, right? And,
Yeah.
and I can order a beer and go to the bathroom, but that's about it.
Cerveza.
Right?
Yeah. And so I think that's part of it, and I agree with the metaphor that you're using in terms of that. But it's got to become rote for them.
Right.
It's got to become an understanding of, all right, what does this mean from a media and reputation perspective? What does this mean potentially with regulators? What does this mean with policymakers? What does this mean with customers? What does this mean with vendors? What does this mean from a B2B or B2C perspective? What does this mean from a legal perspective? Because, if it's a B2B company that's getting breached, good luck, all the lawyers show up.
Yeah.
B2C, there's one.
Right.
I can deal with that. Or I can deal with the class actions that come in. So I think just having a good knowledge of all of that stuff, but really it's not even that those things are happening during a breach. It's, hey, I know the business cold. I'm respected as a business person within the company, not just, hey, we bought the latest router, we bought the latest whatever,
Firewall.
or hey, I got the network back up,
Right.
or I dealt with this phishing attack or whatever.
Love it. Okay, shift a little bit because I definitely want to get to everything. crisis communications, and you said it earlier in kind of a description that you had, and I want to explore that topic a little bit more, which is the intersection of reputation and legal risk.
Right.
Which obviously you say, that's your fun point as it sits right now. So I think, again, for folks from an education perspective, talk to me about the basics. Like, what does it mean? Right? Like, give me the definition, so to speak, and then kind of expand, build up that foundation for folks.
Yeah, let me see what I can do here. But look, for me, the way I describe it is a lot of folks want to just focus on the communication side of things. And so we just talked about being a business person. When I'm in a crisis, and I'm working on one now, and I can't talk a whole lot about that, but it's not just about, hey, what do we say to what audience? It's really about what are the business objectives in this situation? What's the business strategy, and what are the business tactics? How do I digest all of that? How am I part of the problem solving and solution for that? And then secondarily, how am I converting those business objectives into reputational or communications objective strategies and tactics? Because they all have to be aligned and they all have to support. So there's a lot of times where I'm in meetings where, there's a whole legal side of things going on, or there's a whole operational side of things going on, but I've got to be able to have a conversation about the operations or about the supply chain and understand how it works, translate that into the business side, translate that into the reputational side, play it against the legal risk side. And it's really kind of a three-legged stool of, all right, what's the business or operations, what's the reputation, and what's the legal, and how do we work through that? And a lot of times that's a question about where's the biggest risk? And is it going to be reputational, or is it going to be legal? And there are lawyers that I've worked with that say, I'm not worried about the privilege right now because this is an existential crisis reputationally. So we're going to put back burner all the legal risk and focus on the reputational risk because there's an existential risk to the company. Vice versa, look, there's a lot of times where the reputational stuff drives me crazy and it gives me heartburn that we're going to go do something legally. But if we did what I was trying to do reputationally, the legal risk that we take on is significant. At the end of the day, both of those have to be working in parallel, and there are gives and takes. But what's in the best interest of the people that are impacted by whatever the crisis may be? So you hear me talk a lot about who is our North Star. Mm-hmm. That can't be the company that's having the crisis. It's got to be who's the most important stakeholder outside.
Is the tendency for companies typically to go back to the business as their North Star because that's what they know?
It's really interesting. You get companies that are like, look, this is about who's impacted. And so it's great when you're working with executives, and I know that most companies or many companies have mission, vision, values, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. You hear me in a crisis talk a lot about those things because they're not just something on your website. They're not just something that you put out. Hopefully they're the way you are conducting yourselves as a business.
You live them.
All the time. You're living them out through your fingertips. You find out really quickly in a crisis who is and who isn't.
Right.
But I think one of the things that makes me different potentially, especially the lawyers that I work with at Orrick, one in particular, a lot of people, I think, get surprised when a lawyer comes in and starts talking about, what is your mission? What are your values? Mm-hmm. How are we going to live them out here?
Right.
I think a lot of organizations, when lawyers get involved, one, don't talk about that, and two, kind of go, okay, we got to throw everything overboard to just deal with the legal risk. And it's like, no. You've got to live out those values through the legal risk side of things, through the reputational risk side of things. And if you don't, that's going to be really painful. And it's going to be very obvious to people that you're not.
How does a CISO, developing CISO security practitioner, plug themselves into or prepare themselves mentally to plug into this type of process or this type of approach?
I think it'd be really interesting to go ask CISOs, not to pick on them because I think it's
Please do.
pretty
That's
much
what we're here for.
I think it's all employees, but how many people are actually really familiar with their corporate values? How many people are thinking about those as they go about their jobs? How are they intuitive enough or instinctual enough that you just act them out? For a CISO, I think one of the things that they can do is when you think about, all right, we're getting things back. What are we bringing? How are we bringing things back? Part of that can come down to, all right, how are we going to treat who we? I'm in a situation right now. They're trying to onboard people back after a ransomware event. Well, let's think about that. How do you want to do it? Is it your biggest? Are they the white glove? Are you taking a subset of those? Are there learnings that you need from large, medium, and small? Like, let's think about those types of things. But if I'm a CISO, it's like, all right, how am I going to, how do I live these out? And I think part of it is being a reminder to everybody else that, hey, who is our North Star? Everything that we're doing, and calling the team back to, hey, this is the North Star. So what does that mean? How do I translate that into the actions that I'm taking? So it sounds soft. It's actually pretty hard because I think a lot of people look at mission, vision, values and go, yeah, that's just whatever.
Right.
But when you're really thinking about it, what do I want people to know? What do I want them to believe? And what do I want them to feel?
Well, and I think it also goes into when they go to that, when the affected folks outside of the company go to that website, what are they going to go find when they get there?
Yeah.
And what expectation does that set? If you have your mission, vision, values out on your website, right, you're already setting that expectation with those people that are affected.
Yeah.
And so they're going to probably be quick to call you on whether or not you're living that or not. So for us to live that inside is key.
And a lot of it's about trust and reputation, right? I trust you, therefore you have a good reputation. If I don't trust you, then you don't.
Right.
But thinking about those things, trust allows you, gives you a sense of credit with your stakeholder audiences. You don't want to burn that up. There are a lot of various quotes from a lot of famous business icons that talk about trust and the importance of, and how seriously they take it. And yeah, that's one of the things that I spend a lot of time talking about with executives, like, hey, you're already at a trust deficit based on this. Let's put the shovel down.
Right. Put the shovel down.
We don't need to keep digging. Let's be thinking about which actions are going to be most trusted, or how do we rebuild trust in these situations? And a lot of that is, not to be a broken record, but how do you live those values out?
Okay, shift a little bit. Let's go board of directors. We've seen a lot of legal make it on the board of directors. We're seeing an uptick on cyber. One of the things we've talked about in the past is making the case where including people that are experts in the reputation side of risk, obviously what you do. And again, you have a unique perspective. Again, I think bringing people on that have those unique perspectives are very important. So let's talk about why, how would a board benefit, would a company benefit, would a public company benefit from having a reputational risk expertise on their board?
Yeah, as things have gone on in the last kind of 10 years, you saw a lot of lawyers or cyber experts get added, cyber lawyer experts get added, or IT people get added to boards because for that reason. People may think I'm crazy, but the thing that they're leaving out is you've got half the equation, or you've got 2/3 of the equation, right? I've got the business risk and operations risk. I've got the legal risk. Who's looking at all this from a reputation perspective? How are they looking at how do we solidify our reputation and strengthen it in good times? How do we and take it further? How do we recover when we've had these types of incidents? And so I think someone on a board that's looking at things through that lens, I see a lot of value there. And I've talked to a couple different boards of late about that idea. It's like, well, you've got all these legal folks, but they're just, no disrespect, they're brilliant in many cases, but they're focused on the liability side of things. I think one of the things that's unfortunate is I would say many executives are around reputation or communications people that literally are kind of Coke machines and putting out press releases or doing social media or whatever, and it's seen as a cost. One of the things that thanks to some of the mentors that I had in my career, was how do I use communications to drive revenue? How do I use communications or whatever to solve problems or package it with the business side of things? How do I leverage it to win business or contracts? Both or all of those I've done in my career, and been asked to by CEOs. But I think that unfortunately in my discipline or profession, it's not expected that they, one, be business people, two, be asked, how do I leverage communications or marketing or government relations or whatever to solve problems? How do I grow a business through leveraging Congress or a bill or legislation, or, how do I use research to do X or Y or Z? And I think that's unfortunate, because I think most CEOs, most executives haven't been around real strategic communicators that are able to do that. And so therefore I think, you get a lot of people that's like, oh, it's just a cost.
Right.
They're just a Coke machine. I put my dollar in and out comes my soda.
So when you were talking about that aspect, having that strategic level,
Yeah.
and the trust aspect, my brain immediately went to, that's an opportunity to build resilience for your business. Is that, can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I think it is.
Because when the bad times hit, like you said, you talked about the trust deficit, put the shovel down. But what if you've built up a high level of trust, you can slide back a little bit and still have a decent level, right?
Yeah, though I hate the idea of sliding back in that, but it happens to every company, right? You're going to have your issues. Look, there are a lot of things that I used to talk about, like the privacy policies and terms and conditions. I was part at JP Morgan Chase or Bank One, I forget which time they became one. But where we were looking at Reg Z and what a credit card terms and conditions look like, and how do we simplify those? Because that was something that we at the bank came to the conclusion, these are way too difficult, nobody's reading them. How do we make this really simple? How do we, put them in the box that they're in now? How do we, do things like that make it easier? How do we build a privacy and security policy that's on the web that isn't the red flag in front of the bull, but, is pretty straightforward? Or how do we build a trust and safety center, which I built for a social media company, that explains how they handle AML or how they handle, whatever the issue is. CSAM, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a lot that can be done. I think most people don't think about it. And that's unfortunate, because there is resilience there. There is strategic thought that you can build that kind of reservoir of goodwill. And it's as simple as, how do I make something easy and understandable for people?
And in my time knowing you, because I would say before I met you, I was on the other side of things. It kind of, okay, press releases, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, you say some certain things. But as I've gotten to know you, to me, it's more of as I learned through having my own business at one time, if you don't communicate to people and communicate to people in the right way, nobody knows what you're doing, nobody knows your intent, and thereby you cannot develop that trust that you're talking about.
Yeah,
so I think that's the biggest lesson that I've gotten out of this whole thing of our, knowing each other for the years.
Yeah, I work with a lot of companies, and I'm working with one now and have throughout my career, where difficulty hits and they go dark.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that there aren't strategic reasons to go dark. So don't say that. I'm not saying that, hey, you should go out and do all these things. That's not necessarily what I'm saying. But a lot of companies and a lot of individuals, when they hit rough times, don't think, how do I tell my story? They just go quiet and they want to put their head down. And that's fine, but what you see is you create a vacuum then. and no one's filling that vacuum with positives.
Right.
They don't have your best interest at heart. They don't have your customer's best interest at heart. And so what do you end up with? Well, a lot of negative, and not a whole lot of what's actually happening or going on, or any pushback or fight back. And so, look, the fight back's got to be a really strategic thing, and it's got to be thoughtful. And you don't go do that without your lawyers. You don't go do that without your CEO, or in some cases your board. Here's how we're going to fight. And maybe that's we're gonna fight in court. Maybe that's we're gonna fight the battle reputationally. Maybe it's gonna be both. Maybe it's gonna be, hey, we're going to take the hit reputationally because it means more to win in court, because I win the war there. I can win this battle, but if it costs me the war, then I'm guilty. Right. So I've lost. So there are a lot of different things to really be thinking through. It's and like I said, it's not that you just rush out and start communicating or taking various actions, because that may cause big trouble, but you've got to be thoughtful about it and say, all right, what can we do here? And what does that mean? And how do we make that happen?
Sounds to me like we go back to mission, vision, values.
Yeah.
Honestly.
Yeah, a lot of it.
Yeah.
But there's a lot that you can do too. You may be quiet publicly, but there's a lot you can do congressionally. There's a lot and politically, there's a lot that you can do in various things that, are influencer, and not the type that you see on
social,
not the type that you see on Instagram or your Finstagram, but there's a lot of influence, and there's a lot of relationship building, and I think that's something that people don't think about as well when you're thinking about somebody that's in a chief communications officer role or a chief marketing officer role. Truth builds trust. Trust builds relationship. Relationship makes almost anything possible. Right. And so that's something that I'm always thinking about is, all right, I can be truthful. Doesn't mean that I'm 100% transparent. Right. Because in most crisis situations you can't. Right. That takes you into the liability area. But if I can be truthful, if I can build that trust, if I can build that relationship, there are a lot of keys on the keyboard that I can play.
Right.
So let's figure out how we play it and how we develop our song.
I want to touch one more thing before we get to 10 questions with David Chamberlin. All right, so I always try to have takeaways, and I think we've had great conversation, don't get me wrong, but I want like real salt of the earth, touch the person on the nose takeaways for folks. So for those folks that are developing into CISOs, they have that goal, or they're a sitting CISO today, let's talk about their role in communications more tactically, right?
Yeah.
So what should they be thinking about? How do they develop themselves? If we're talking non-breach, right? Day to day, here's everything, what does it look like? Like, what should they be thinking about on the daily when it comes to communication?
I'm going to sound like I'm parroting Joe Sullivan because I've spent a decent amount of time with him.
It's okay.
Look, if you look at Joe's case, if you look at SolarWinds' case, you look at some other things, there are key relationships that need to develop. So, a lawyer and I that I work with wrote a piece about how communicators should work with lawyers and how lawyers need to be thinking about communicators. And the first thing that both of us talk about is you got to have a relationship. So if I'm a CISO, I've got to have a relationship with my GC or my deputy GC, whoever's in charge of technology, but I want to have a relationship before I hit that issue, whatever the crisis is. I want to understand, I want to have a relationship with both my chief communications officer and my chief marketing officer. Why? Look at Joe Sullivan's case, look at the SolarWinds case. Also, I want to have a relationship with my head of investor relations for the same reasons. I've got to have a relationship there. I need to see what's being said about us from a security perspective. I need to have a voice in that conversation. If I'm not a CISO, obviously, but if I were one, I'd be like, hey, what all are you guys saying about our security posture, our cybersecurity, our privacy, our this or that? I need to sign off on that. I need to make sure that that's actually accurate. So those are relationships that I think that in the last couple of years with Joe and with SolarWinds that CISOs are thinking more about. My gut is that they're probably not thinking about it enough in the day-to-day, and I doubt that they're going, hey, let me take the chief communications officer, the chief marketing officer, or the general counsel, let's just go get lunch. For me, that truth, trust, relationship thing is really important because if I have a relationship with you, I'm able to get a lot more done than if I'm not. And you're gonna know my tendencies, you're gonna know my personality, you're gonna know my stupid jokes, that I like to pun or whatever it is, or I like to inject popular culture into a crisis, or I'll laugh before I'll cry. I wanna know those tendencies. I wanna know who my teammates are. So for me, that if I'm a CISO, those are the things that I'm really thinking about. And I know it sounds soft. Like, what do you mean you're talking about relationship? But yeah, that could be the difference between you getting charged and you not.
Well, let's turn this into incident breach, right?
Yeah.
So now we're talking communications during that time. Sounds like now we're leveraging the relationships that you just talked about. Now that's a level of trust that we're going to have to rely on to be able to move through this challenging time. Yes.
Yeah. I mean, look, a lot of this is going to be, I've dealt with CISOs that when push comes to shove, they want to tell you what they think you want to hear versus what I actually need to hear. And if I'm dealing with all of these various stakeholders, regulators, and the legal team's dealing with that, but everything comms is impacting that, et cetera. I don't have the time or the place for you to be telling me what you think I want to hear. My whole thing is like, no, I need to know worst case. I need to know, like, what percentage are you at in terms of you saying when we're going to be back online or when we're going to have moved on-prem to cloud, or name your thing, right? Like, I can't have you, you've just got to be honest with me. And look, you can tell me that in confidence, you can tell me that in whatever, but I need to know, because all of these other stakeholders out here, that's their main question. Is when am I going to be back online, or when am I going to be able to buy something from you, or when am I going to be able to whatever it is. When will your stores be back open?
Right.
So I've got to, that's got to be a very real relationship. And so, everything that they're telling me in a breach, and I try and stay away from the CISO or the CIO or their teams. Designate somebody that I can talk to that's going to be honest, because I know that you've got bigger fish to fry, which is get us the heck back online, or our systems up, or whatever. They need to understand that what they're doing touches so many other things that they're probably not thinking about. And so, it comes back to, let's be truthful as much as we can be, because we've got to manage expectations for people.
I think that's a great place to leave it. So now we're going to do 10 questions
All right.
with David Chamberlin.
I'll buckle up.
What's your favorite word?
Favorite word?
Yep.
Anne. It's my wife's name.
Nice. What's your least favorite word?
Least favorite word? Wow. Blasphemy.
I always try not to do commentary when I hear, but you're cracking me up, dude. What area of your work do you find the most interesting?
I love solving problems. I love coming into a situation going, I don't know how we fix this. And weeks or months later, being able to look back and go, oh my gosh, look what we did.
Right.
Didn't think it was going to play out that way. So for me, I love being able to fix problems. And I love working with lawyers, for example, that I work with that are more problem solvers than what I would say my experience with traditional lawyers has been.
What area of your work is the most challenging for you?
Most challenging. I don't know. I was going to say something flippant, but probably this is going to sound horrible because I'm going to sound really arrogant, and I don't mean to. Working with people that there's no give or take, or they just aren't intellectually curious or want to learn. That's frustrating.
I understand that. No, I
So
100%. What sound or noise do you love?
sound or noise that I love. Probably the wind going by on a bike.
What sound or noise do you hate?
Depends on whose it is, but crying babies.
Understood. What's your favorite curse word?
Frick, which it usually in not usually, in certain situations goes further.
What profession other than your own would you like to attempt?
I get asked a lot if I wish I would have been a lawyer, which would be really interesting to me if I were a litigator that got to play across a broad portfolio. I think one of the things that's really interesting, you didn't ask for this answer, but everything's becoming so specialized, and you've got people that are an inch wide and feet deep, right? And I understand that there's a need for experts in fields, and if I'm hiring a lawyer that's got a specific issue, or I have a specific issue and they're that person, then that's great. But for me, I would probably be a litigator, and I would want to play across a large number of areas, white collar, cyber, whatever, versus just being, hey, I'm the cybersecurity lawyer, or hey, I'm the contracts lawyer.
Right.
The latter, I'd blow my brains out. That'd be like being the accountant.
tax lawyer.
That would be like going back and being the accountant again. Oh, this is all going to be spreadsheets. No,
I'm out. What profession would you not like to do?
Oh, there are a lot of them. Would I not like to do? Well, when I was growing up, because both my parents were teachers and then principals and administrators, I said teacher. I actually really enjoy teaching, but not in the formal sense of a classroom. So if you put me in a classroom, I'd be like, no way.
I'm out.
But if you put me in a less formal teaching environment, I really, really enjoy that.
Final question.
Yes, sir.
If heaven exists, what would you like to hear your God say when you arrive at the pearly gates?
Well done, my good and faithful servant.
David Chamberlin, thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks for having me.
Appreciate it, man.
I appreciate it.
Great conversation. Obviously, I've kind of stopped the recap because it's just so hard to do because we cover so many things. But I think from the spirit of this show, right, having on people that work in the same circles, right, but not in the seat, very important, very key. I think walking away from this, I've already learned stuff, and I've known you for so long. So to be able to have this and put it out to the audience where people can pick it up and say, okay, mission, vision, values, that kind of thing. Yeah. I think that's a very, very good thing that now we as stewards, and again, I think you hit the nail on the head, we see so much as CISOs across all of our organizations to be able to go in and be kind of that beacon, and maybe that's a little strong, but
no, I think
kind
it's
of be
fair.
that beacon. I think that'll help us because it'll help us achieve what we're looking to achieve,
right,
as well as the business goals as well.
Yeah.
So Again, truly appreciate it. Colleagues and friends, I renew the call. We must professionalize the role of the CISO. In the meantime, I wish you health, happiness, and success on your journey in becoming the professional CISO. Let's do this.
We're professionalizing the CISO role, so please subscribe to the Professional CISO podcast.